I'm Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, and 3 months ago I was planning nursery colors for the baby I'm carrying when I got the call that changed everything. My husband David died in a construction accident, and I thought his family would rally around me and our unborn child during the darkest time of my life. Instead, at his funeral, his mother pulled me aside and whispered the words that still haunt me: "An abortion would be mercy for everyone, dear. This baby will only remind us of what we've lost." But what his family didn't know was that David had left behind more than just grief. He'd left behind secrets that would expose exactly who they really were. And when they tried to control my pregnancy, they had no idea they were messing with a woman who had just discovered she was about to inherit everything they thought belonged to them. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Like if you've ever faced family betrayal during your most vulnerable moments. 6 months earlier, our biggest worry was whether to paint the nursery yellow or wait to find out the gender. David would place his hands on my barely showing belly every morning, whispering promises to our unborn child about weekend camping trips and teaching them to ride a bike. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. David worked construction, and I managed the local veterinary clinic. We weren't rich, but we were happy. The morning of March 15th started like any other. David kissed me goodbye at 6:30 a.m., his hard hat tucked under his arm, lunchbox in hand. "Love you both," he said, patting my stomach gently. Those were his last words to me in person. The call came at 2:47 p.m. I remember the exact time, because I was updating patient files when my phone rang. "Mrs. Mitchell? This is Dr. Rodriguez from Mercy General Hospital. Your husband has been in an accident." The drive to the hospital felt endless. David's supervisor met me in the waiting room, his face grim. "Sarah, there was a crane malfunction." David. He was trying to get everyone clear when the beam fell. The words felt surreal, like someone else's nightmare. In the ICU, David looked so small, surrounded by machines. His mother Margaret arrived within an hour, followed by his brother Jake and Jake's wife Emma. I expected comfort, shared grief, mutual support. Instead, I felt like an intruder in their family circle. Margaret barely acknowledged me, focusing entirely on David. When the doctor explained that David's injuries were too severe, that we needed to make difficult decisions, Margaret turned to me with cold eyes. "This is family business, Sarah. You've only been married 2 years. David died at 11:23 p.m. As I held his hand and whispered final words of love, Margaret stood behind me, silent and rigid. Jake wept openly, but Emma just stared at my pregnant belly with an expression I couldn't read. The wedding photo on our nightstand caught my eye when I returned home alone that night. In our joy and innocence, we looked invincible. Now the frame was cracked from where I'd knocked it over in my rush to get to the hospital. The break ran right between our faces, a perfect metaphor for how quickly everything had shattered. David's phone sat on the kitchen counter, and I couldn't bring myself to turn it off. That's when I saw his final text, sent at 2:15 p.m., 32 minutes before the accident. "Sarah, if something happens to me, check the safe. Password is your due date. Love you both." I stared at the message, my hands shaking. What safe? In 3 years together, David had never mentioned a safe. The funeral was held at St. Mary's Cathedral, a church David and I had never attended together. Margaret had made all the arrangements without consulting me, choosing readings and hymns that felt foreign to the man I'd loved. I sat in the front pew, 5 months pregnant and utterly alone, while Margaret played the grieving mother for the crowd. "David was such a devoted son," she told the gathered mourners, her voice carrying perfectly to the back of the church. "He always put family first." Her eyes found mine briefly, and I saw something cold and calculating there. During the reception, Margaret worked the room like a politician, accepting condolences and sharing carefully crafted memories. Jake stood near the buffet table, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Emma hovered nearby, whispering urgently in his ear whenever someone approached. I was picking up a sandwich when David's former supervisor, Mike, approached me. Sarah, I wanted you to know about David's benefits package. A life insurance policy is substantial. Have you spoken with HR yet? Life insurance? I felt a flutter of confusion. David and I never discussed life insurance. Mike's eyebrows rose. Really, he increased his coverage just 6 months ago. Sorry, he wanted to make sure his family would be taken care of if anything happened. He handed me a business card. Call Linda in HR tomorrow. She'll walk you through everything. I studied the card, my mind racing. David had never mentioned increasing insurance coverage. What else didn't I know about our financial situation? Later, as guests began to leave, Margaret cornered me near the church entrance. Her public mask of grief had slipped, revealing something much harder underneath. We need to talk, Sarah, about the future. Her voice was low, meant only for my ears. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't play naive with me. David's gone, and you're carrying a baby you'll struggle to raise alone. An abortion would be mercy for everyone, dear. This baby will only remind us of what we've lost. I felt the blood drain from my face. How can you say that? This baby is all I have left of David. Exactly. A constant reminder of our pain. Think about it practically, Sarah. You make $35,000 a year at that animal clinic. How will you afford childcare? A bigger place? Medical bills? Margaret's voice took on a tone of false concern. David wouldn't want you to struggle. David wanted this baby, I whispered, my voice trembling with fury. David wanted a lot of things he couldn't afford. But he's not here anymore, is he? Jake appeared beside his mother, his face pale. Mom, maybe this isn't the time. There's never a good time for difficult conversations, Jake. Margaret's eyes never left my face. Think about what I've said, Sarah, for everyone's sake. As they walked away, I caught Emma staring at me from across the parking lot. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, but not before I saw something that looked like guilt in her expression. Driving home alone, I couldn't shake the feeling that David's family knew something I didn't. The insurance policy Mike mentioned, Margaret's certainty about our financial struggles. The way Jake couldn't meet my eyes, it all felt orchestrated somehow. At home, I sat in David's chair and pulled out the business card Mike had given me. Tomorrow I would call Linda in HR. Tonight, I needed to find that safe David had mentioned in his final text. I spent an hour searching every inch of our small house. David wasn't the type to hide things, but apparently, I didn't know my husband as well as I thought. Finally, in our bedroom closet, behind a stack of winter coats I rarely moved, I found a small digital safe mounted to the wall behind. David's old army footlocker. My due date, September 15th. I typed 915 with trembling fingers. The safe clicked open. Inside was a leather portfolio I'd never seen before, thick with documents that made my head spin. Property deeds, bank statements, investment account summaries, all bearing David's name. As I spread the papers across our bed, a picture emerged that left me breathless. David owned 3 rental properties. 3. I stared at the addresses, recognizing one as being in the nice part of town where we'd sometimes drive on Sundays, dreaming about someday living there. According to the deeds, David had owned that someday for 2 years. The bank statements were even more shocking. Our joint checking account, the one I monitored religiously to stretch David's construction wages, contained our usual $3,200, but David had a separate savings account with $180,000, an investment portfolio worth another $340,000, a business account for Mitchell Property Management with $85,000. Had to read the numbers 3 times before they sank in. My husband, who clipped coupons and insisted we buy generic groceries, was worth over $2 million. At the bottom of the portfolio was a handwritten note in David's familiar scrawl. Sarah, if you're reading this, something's happened to me. I kept this separate to protect you from my family's expectations. They think I'm barely scraping by, and I've let them believe it. The properties provide $8,500 monthly income. Jake manages them but doesn't know about the investments. I've been giving Mom $2,000 a month for years. She expects you to continue. You don't have to. All of this is yours and our baby's now. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I wanted to surprise you after the baby came. I love you both. I sank onto the bed, holding the note against my chest. David had been supporting his mother all these years, and she had the audacity to suggest I couldn't afford to raise his child. The cruel irony was staggering. My phone rang, startling me. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation. I know a discreet clinic that I'm not having an abortion, Margaret. Don't be foolish. You have no idea what you're facing financially. David barely made enough to support you, let alone a child. I looked at the bank statements spread across my bed, at David's careful handwriting detailing monthly income that exceeded both our previous salaries combined. Actually, Margaret, I think I'll be just fine. Sarah, be realistic. The insurance money won't last forever, assuming there even is any. David wasn't exactly financially responsible. How would you know about David's financial situation? There was a pause. I'm his mother. I know he struggled to make ends meet. Funny, he seemed to manage fine, sending you $2,000 every month. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice was different, sharper, more calculating. I don't know what you think you found, Sarah, but David was barely getting by. If he was sending money anywhere, it was probably to cover debts you don't know about. I found his records, Margaret. All of them. Records can be misleading. David wasn't good with money. Never was. Whatever you think you've discovered, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. The point is, you're young and unmarried now. You have options. I'm a widow, not unmarried. And I'm keeping my baby. We'll see about that, Margaret said, and the line went dead. I stared at the phone, a chill running down my spine. There was something in Margaret's tone, a threat barely concealed. For the first time since David's death, I felt truly afraid. Margaret's visits became daily occurrences. She would arrive unannounced, always with the same message delivered in increasingly desperate ways. First, it was gentle persuasion about my difficult situation, then concern for my health. Finally, barely concealed threats about what would happen if I brought an unwanted child into this world. David's father would be rolling in his grave, she said, during one particularly vicious visit, standing in my living room like she owned it. He specifically said the Mitchell name should die with dignity. David's father died when he was 12, Margaret. He never said any such thing. You don't know what Frank said to me in private, about bloodlines, about family responsibility. I was folding baby clothes I'd secretly bought, trying to maintain some normalcy in the chaos my life had become. What's this really about, Margaret? Because it's not about David's father's imaginary opinions. She sat down heavily on my couch, and for the first time I saw cracks in her composed facade. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her purse, and I noticed her usually perfect manicure was chipped. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Sarah. David may have left you some money, but it won't be enough, not for what's coming. What's coming? Instead of answering, she pulled out a crumpled envelope. I found this in David's father's things after he died. Frank wrote it during his final illness, when the medications made him honest. The letter was written in shaky handwriting on hospital stationery. As I read, my stomach dropped. Margaret, I need to tell you something before I go. The business is failing. Has been for 2 years. I've been borrowing against the house, taking cash advances, even used Jake's college fund. When I'm gone, you'll have about 6 months before the creditors come calling. David doesn't know. I couldn't bear to tell him his inheritance is debt, not prosperity. You'll need to figure something out. Maybe David can help, but don't put this burden on him until you have to. I'm sorry, I failed everyone. Frank. I looked up at Margaret, understanding dawning. How long have you known about this? 15 years. Frank died owing $180,000 to various creditors. I've been managing payments, but it's been getting harder. David's monthly support barely covers the interest anymore. You've been taking David's money to pay off debts he didn't even know about, to save his inheritance. The house, the business, it's all Mitchell family legacy. I couldn't let creditors take everything Frank worked for. So, you let David believe you needed help with living expenses while you were actually paying off secret debts. Margaret's composure cracked completely. You think this has been easy? Do you know what it's like watching your son scrape together money to help you, knowing you're just throwing it into a bottomless pit? I've been drowning for 15 years, Sarah. David's death was supposed to. The insurance money could have finally cleared everything. Supposed to what, Margaret? Nothing. I didn't mean that. But her eyes told a different story. You're counting on David's life insurance to pay off Frank's debts. And if I have this baby, the money gets split between me and the child. But if there's no baby ... Don't be ridiculous. I would never, you would never what? Hope for my miscarriage? Encourage an abortion? Make my life so miserable that I lose the baby from stress? Margaret stood abruptly, her mask firmly back in place. You're being hysterical. Pregnancy hormones make women paranoid. Get out of my house, Margaret. This isn't over, Sarah. You're making a mistake that will ruin everyone's life, including your own. After she left, I sat in the quiet of my home, David's father's letters still in my hands. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than I'd imagined. Margaret wasn't just unsupportive, she was desperate. And desperate people do dangerous things. I called the number on Linda's business card. It was time to learn exactly how much David's life was worth to his family, and how far they might go to claim it. Linda from HR was a godsend. Not only did she walk me through David's life insurance policy, a staggering $500,000 payout, but she also recommended her sister, Rebecca Chun, an estate attorney who specialized in inheritance disputes. Family gets ugly when money's involved, Rebecca warned during our first meeting in her downtown office. And pregnancy makes you vulnerable in ways you might not realize. I spread David's documents across her conference table, watching her eyebrows rise as she reviewed the property deeds and bank statements. Your husband was quite methodical. Everything's properly documented, which will work in your favor. Margaret seems to think she has some claim to his assets. Rebecca pulled out a legal pad. Under California law, you're the surviving spouse. Everything transfers to you automatically, unless there's a will stating otherwise. Was David's relationship with his family complicated? I told her about the secret financial support, Frank's hidden debts, and Margaret's increasingly aggressive behavior. Rebecca took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that made me realize how calculated Margaret's campaign had become. Pressure for abortion concerns me most, Rebecca said. It suggests she believes eliminating the baby would somehow benefit her financially, but that's not how inheritance law works. The child's existence doesn't change your rights as surviving spouse. Then why is she so focused on it? Two possibilities. Either she doesn't understand the law, or there's something else going on. Has anyone mentioned contesting David's mental capacity, claiming he wasn't competent when he created these accounts? My blood ran cold. No, but Margaret keeps saying David wasn't good with money, that he was confused about finances. Classic setup for a competency challenge. If they can prove David was mentally impaired when he accumulated these assets, they might argue the transfers weren't valid. Rebecca leaned forward. Sarah, I need to ask something sensitive. Are you certain this baby is David's? Of course. We've been trying to get pregnant for over a year. I believe you, but they might not. In inheritance disputes involving unborn children, paternity sometimes becomes an issue. I'd recommend a prenatal paternity test. That seems extreme. It's insurance. If Margaret's desperate enough to pressure you for an abortion, she's desperate enough to challenge paternity. The test will give us scientific proof that shuts down that avenue of attack. 2 days later, I underwent the simple blood test that would confirm what I already knew: this baby was unquestionably David's son. The results came back with 99.9% certainty. But more importantly, they came with something I hadn't expected: the baby's gender. A boy. I was carrying David's son. I called Rebecca immediately. The test results are in. It's definitely David's baby. And it's a boy. Excellent. Now we have documentation that will hold up in any court. But Sarah, I want you to be extra careful. You mentioned Margaret's visits are becoming more frequent. Every day now, she's getting more aggressive. Document everything. Save voicemails. Keep a journal of her visits. Record dates and times. If this escalates to legal action, we'll need evidence of harassment. That evening, as if summoned by our conversation, Margaret appeared at my door again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Jake stood behind her, looking miserable. "We need to have a family meeting," Margaret announced, pushing past me into my living room. "This is my home, Margaret. You can't just... Jake has something to tell you. About David's mental state before he died." Jake's face was pale and he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mum, I don't think..." "Tell her, Jake. About David's confusion. His mood swings. The way he'd forget things." I stared at Jake, understanding flooding through me. "You're building a case to claim David was mentally incompetent." "David wasn't well," Margaret said firmly. "The stress of his job, the pressure of supporting everyone, it was affecting his judgment. Jake witnessed it firsthand." "Is that true, Jake?" I asked directly. He looked between his mother and me, conflict written across his features. "David was stressed. Yes, but he wasn't incompetent. He knew exactly what he was doing." "Jake," Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. "No, Mom, I won't lie about this. David was the smartest person I knew when it came to money. He planned everything carefully." Jake turned to me, his voice stronger now. "I manage his rental properties, Sarah. He walked me through every detail, every expense, every tenant issue. His mind was sharp until the day he died." Margaret's face went white, then red. "You're both making a terrible mistake. When the creditors come calling, when you realize what financial trouble looks like, don't come crying to me." After they left, I sat down and wrote detailed notes about the conversation, including Jake's refusal to support his mother's claims. Rebecca was right. I needed to document everything. But as I wrote, one thought kept nagging at me. Margaret had said when the creditors come calling, not if. What exactly was she expecting to happen? The voicemails started the next morning. I woke to 17 missed calls, all from Margaret, each message more frantic than the last. "Sarah, it's Margaret. Call me back. We need to discuss your situation." "Sarah, this is getting ridiculous. You're being selfish and short-sighted. That baby is going to ruin everyone's life, including yours. David wouldn't want this burden on you." By the 10th message, her voice had turned threatening. "You have no idea what you're bringing on yourself. David protected you from reality, but he's not here anymore. Call me back before you make an irreversible mistake." The final message, left at 3:47 a.m., was the most chilling. "Some mistakes can't be undone. Sarah, think about what's best for everyone before it's too late." I saved each voicemail and forwarded them to Rebecca's office. Then I tried to go about my normal day, but normal felt impossible when your phone rang every 30 minutes. Emma joined the campaign by noon. Her approach was different: false friendship wrapped around manipulation. "Sarah, honey, I'm so worried about you," she said when she appeared at my workplace during lunch. "You look exhausted. Are you sleeping? Eating properly?" "I'm fine, Emma. It's just that pregnancy is so hard on the body, especially when you're grieving, and you're so young. You have your whole life ahead of you." She touched my arm with practiced sympathy. "There's no shame in admitting this isn't the right time. David. And I wanted this baby. David wanted a lot of things. He also wanted you to be happy and secure. Would he really want you struggling as a single mother? Margaret mentioned you barely make enough to cover rent. I stared at her, amazed at the web of lies they'd constructed. Margaret doesn't know anything about my finances. Of course she does. David told her everything. He was so worried about providing for you both. The stress was eating him alive. That's not true. Emma's expression shifted, becoming more calculating. Sarah, I'm trying to help you here. Margaret's not going to drop this. She believes that baby is going to destroy what's left of this family. If you think she's pushy now, wait until you see what desperation looks like. Is that a threat? It's a warning. From someone who cares about you. After Emma left, my supervisor, Dr. Martinez, called me into his office. Sarah, I need to ask, are you okay? You seem distracted lately, and there was a woman here earlier asking questions about your employment. What kind of questions? Your salary, your hours, whether you've been reliable. I told her it was none of her business, but she seemed very interested in your financial situation. You leaned forward with concern. She said she was David's mother, but something felt off about her questions. She was probably just worried about me. Maybe, but she also asked if we'd be keeping you on after the baby comes, and whether we offer maternity benefits. Almost like she was fishing for information to use against you somehow. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Margaret wasn't just pressuring me. She was investigating me, building some kind of case. For what? The answer came that evening when Jake called, his voice tight with anxiety. Sarah, I need to warn you about something. Mom's been talking to a lawyer. What kind of lawyer? The kind that handles probate disputes. She's trying to find grounds to contest David's will and assets. She thinks if she can prove you're unfit to raise the baby, or that David was incompetent when he set up his accounts, she might be able to claim guardianship or something. Guardianship of what? The baby, the inheritance, everything. Jake paused. Sarah, she's not thinking clearly. The debt situation is worse than she's told you. Dad's creditors have been patient, but they're starting to make demands. Mom owes almost $300,000 now with accumulated interest. Jake, David's been giving her $2,000 a month for years. How did the debt increase? Gambling. The word came out like a confession. Mom's been gambling away most of what David sent. The creditors know about David's death, about the insurance money. They're expecting payment soon. So she needs David's inheritance to pay off debts that she created by gambling away his support money. Yes, and if there's a baby involved, the inheritance gets complicated. But if something happened to the baby, or if she could prove you're unfit, all the money would go to her as next of kin. I finished. I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have told you sooner. I kept hoping she'd come to her senses. After Jake hung up, I sat in my darkened living room, listening to my phone buzz with new voicemails from Margaret. I didn't need to listen to them to know. They were getting worse. Rebecca had been right. I needed to document everything. But more than that, I needed to understand exactly how far Margaret was willing to go to claim what she saw as her salvation. The baby kicked inside me, a strong flutter of life that reminded me what I was fighting for. David's son deserved better than to be seen as an obstacle to his grandmother's financial recovery. I started a new voice memo on my phone. Day 7 of harassment campaign. Margaret left 17 voicemails between midnight and 4 a.m. I was sorting through David's belongings, trying to find strength in his memory, when I discovered his childhood diary tucked between old photo albums. The entries, written in his adolescent handwriting, painted a picture of his family that made my stomach turn. Mum screamed at me for 2 hours today because I spent my birthday money on baseball cards instead of giving it to her for groceries. She said I was selfish like Dad. I don't understand why everything is always my fault. Jake got straight A's again, but Mom barely noticed. She was too busy yelling at me for getting a B+ in math. Jake tries to stick up for me, but she gets mad at him too. Sometimes I think about running away. Lisa tried to call today, but Mom hung up on her. She says Lisa is poison, and turned against the family. I miss my sister. Mum burned all her pictures. Lisa, David had a sister I'd never met. Never even heard him mention. I flipped through more entries, piecing together a story of an older sister who'd escaped the family toxicity only to be completely erased from their narrative. Found Lisa's old address in Dad's papers. She lives in Portland now. Maybe someday I'll be brave enough to call her. I grabbed my laptop and started searching. Lisa Mitchell, Portland, Oregon. It took an hour, but I found her. Lisa Mitchell Rodriguez, a social worker specializing in family trauma. The irony was almost perfect. My hands shook as I dialed her number. Lisa, this is Sarah Mitchell. I was married to your brother David. Silence stretched across the line before she spoke, her voice cautious. Was? What do you mean was? David died 3 weeks ago. Construction accident. I heard her sharp intake of breath. I found your name in his childhood diary. I think I need help understanding his family. Oh God, David's dead? Her voice cracked. I haven't spoken to him in 8 years. Mom convinced him I was trying to destroy the family. Can we meet? I'm pregnant with David's baby, and Margaret is. She's trying to pressure me into an abortion. Jesus Christ. That sounds exactly like something she'd do. Lisa's anger was immediate and fierce. How far along are you? 6 months. Don't let her near you, Sarah. Do you understand me? Margaret is dangerous when she's desperate, and she's been desperate my entire life. 2 days later, Lisa drove down from Portland. Seeing her was like seeing a female version of David. Same warm brown eyes, same gentle smile. But there was a hardness to her that David had never developed, a wariness that spoke of hard-won experience. Tell me everything, she said as we sat in my living room. I shared the whole story, the hidden assets, the gambling debts, the harassment campaign, Margaret's legal threats. Lisa listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. Classic Margaret, she said finally. She's following the same playbook she used on me when I tried to leave for college. What happened? I had a scholarship to Portland State, everything paid for. The week before I was supposed to leave, Margaret suddenly developed mysterious health problems. Chest pains, fainting spells, the works. She convinced Dad that I was abandoning the family in their time of need. Lisa's laugh was bitter. I stayed home and worked at a diner to help with medical bills that probably never existed. How did you finally get away? It took me 3 years to realize the medical emergency was fake. By then, I'd lost my scholarship, but I'd also figured out how Margaret operated. She creates crises to control people. If you're not useful to her, you're an enemy. Lisa pulled out a worn manila folder. I've been documenting Margaret's behavior for years, hoping someday David would need this information. Letters from her demanding money, voicemails threatening to disown me if I didn't fall in line. Even medical records proving her emergency hospitalizations were voluntary psychiatric holds. Psychiatric holds? Margaret has a history of mental health crises when she doesn't get her way. 3 times she's been hospitalized for suicidal ideation. That mysteriously resolved once she got attention or money from the family. I stared at the documents, understanding dawning. She's done this before. Created emergencies to manipulate family members. The gambling is new, but the manipulation is vintage Margaret. David was her golden goose. He had money and guilt in equal measure. But you're different. You're not her child, so guilt won't work. That leaves fear and desperation. Jake warned me she's talking to lawyers about contesting David's will. Of course she is. But here's what she doesn't know. David called me 6 months ago. My heart stopped. He did. He was planning to cut contact with Margaret after the baby was born. He'd figured out the gambling, the manipulation, all of it. He said he wanted his child to grow up free from the toxicity that poisoned his childhood. Lisa handed me a folded paper. He asked me to write down everything I remembered about growing up in that house. For evidence, if he ever needed it. The paper contained a detailed timeline of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and psychological control spanning decades. Reading it felt like getting a glimpse into an alternate reality, where David's family love was actually systematic exploitation. David was going to show this to a therapist after the baby came. He wanted to learn how to break the cycle of abuse before he became a father. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling David's presence more strongly than I had since his death. He was protecting our baby even then, and now you have to finish what he started. Margaret doesn't just want the money, Sarah. She wants to control the next generation, turn your son into another victim. David died before he could stop her, but I can. We can, Lisa corrected. I've been waiting 8 years for the chance to expose what Margaret really is. David's death. It's horrible, but maybe it's also an opportunity to finally hold her accountable. For the first time since David's funeral, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. David's sister had returned from exile, and she'd brought ammunition for a war one was finally ready to win. Lisa and I spent the weekend building our case against Margaret, and what we discovered was damning. Armed with David's financial records and Lisa's historical documentation, we traced a pattern of financial abuse that stretched back 15 years. Look at this, Lisa said, spreading bank statements across my kitchen table. David started sending Margaret money in 2008. $500 a month initially, right after his father died, I noted, checking dates. But watch how it escalates. Lisa pointed to subsequent statements. By 2015, it's $1,000 a month. By 2020, it's $2,000. Every time David got a raise or made a smart investment, Margaret's expenses mysteriously increased. I pulled out David's property management records. Jake told me he manages the rental properties. Look at this. David was making $8,500 a month in rental income, but he was only keeping $6,500. The missing $2,000 went to Margaret every single month. Now cross-reference this with her gambling records. Lisa had somehow obtained Margaret's credit card statements through means I didn't want to examine too closely. See these charges? Twin Rivers Casino 3 times a week. Sometimes daily during bad months. The pattern was stark. Margaret would receive David's $2,000 monthly support, and within days it would be gone to gambling. Then she'd call with a new crisis, broken appliances, medical bills, property taxes, anything to justify additional emergency funds. David gave her an extra $15,000 last year alone. I calculated, adding up the irregular transfers. She was gambling away his regular support and coming back for more. And he never questioned it because he thought he was helping his struggling mother. Lisa's voice was tight with anger. She's been running a con on her own son for over a decade. We had documentation, but we needed more. Lisa made a call to her contact at the Oregon Department of Human Services, a colleague who specialized in financial elder abuse cases. Margaret's not elderly, but the patterns are identical. Lisa explained after the call, creating fake emergencies, escalating financial demands, emotional manipulation when victims resist. My colleague says this behavior usually gets worse when the primary victim becomes unavailable, like when David died. Exactly. Now Margaret's lost her steady income source, but the gambling debts are still growing. She's in panic mode, which makes her dangerous. That evening, Margaret called again, but this time, instead of letting it go to voicemail, I answered. Finally, Sarah, we need to talk immediately. I'm listening. I've been patient with your stubbornness, but time is running out. The creditors are demanding payment. If David's assets get tied up in probate because of that baby, everyone suffers. What creditors, Margaret? Don't play dumb. You know about your father-in-law's debts. You mean the debts you've been paying with David's money? The money he thought was going to help with your living expenses. Silence. Then, I don't know what lies you've been told. I have bank records, Margaret. 15 years of transfers from David to you, and credit card statements showing where that money really went. Twin Rivers Casino ring any bell, you little bitch? You have no right to. I have every right. I'm David's widow and the mother of his child. And I know exactly what you've been doing. You know nothing. David was supporting his family, which is more than you're willing to do. Supporting his family? Or feeding your gambling addiction while you manipulated him with fake emergencies. Those weren't fake. I had real expenses, medical bills that were actually psychiatric holds. Property repairs that were actually poker debts. Margaret, I know everything. The silence stretched longer this time. When Margaret spoke again, her voice was different, colder, more calculated. Fine. You want to play hardball? You're about to learn what real financial pressure looks like. That insurance money? That inheritance? I'm going to tie it up in court for years. You'll spend every penny fighting me, and in the end, you'll get nothing. Actually, Margaret, I think you're the one who's about to get nothing. What's that supposed to mean? I looked at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly. It means David's sister is back in town. And she has some very interesting stories to tell about family patterns of financial abuse. Lisa? Margaret's voice cracked. Lisa's been gone for years. She's not part of this family anymore. She's part of David's family. And she's been documenting your behavior for a very long time. Lisa is mentally unstable. Whatever she's told you is corroborated by financial records, medical documents, and 15 years of David's own notes about your manipulation. Margaret hung up without another word. Lisa smiled grimly. Phase 1 complete. Now she knows. We're not backing down. What's phase 2? We go public. Margaret's power has always come from operating in secret, making her victims feel isolated and ashamed. Time to drag her behavior into the light. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Mom's having a breakdown. Says you and Lisa are trying to destroy the family. I think you should know she's talking about doing something desperate. I showed the message to Lisa, who frowned. Desperate how? With Margaret, that could mean anything from a fake suicide attempt to trying to have you declared mentally incompetent. Lisa stood up, gathering our documentation. We need to move faster than I thought. What do you mean? I mean, we need to get this information to Rebecca immediately. If Margaret's feeling cornered, she's about to escalate in ways that could be dangerous for you and the baby. For the first time since this began, I felt a flutter of real fear. Not just for my inheritance or my future, but for my physical safety and my unborn son's life. Margaret wasn't just fighting for money anymore. She was fighting for survival, and that made her capable of anything. Lisa suggested we visit David's rental properties to better understand the extent of his hidden financial empire. You need to see what your husband built, she said. And his tenants need to know what's happening. The first property was a duplex in a modest neighborhood across town. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly tenant in Unit A, greeted us warmly when we knocked. You must be Sarah. David talked about you and the baby all the time. Such a sweet man, always. Asking about my grandchildren, her face fell. I still can't believe he's gone. How long have you lived here, Mrs. Henderson? 3 years. David bought this place right after my husband died, and I couldn't afford our old rent anymore. He set my payment at exactly what I could manage on Social Security. She dabbed at her eyes. Most landlords would have seen a poor widow as a liability. David saw someone who needed help. Jake met us at the second property, a small single-family home where a young couple lived with their toddler. The husband, Marcus, worked 2 part-time jobs while his wife finished nursing school. David saved our lives, Marcus told us as we stood in his tidy front yard. When my wife got pregnant, we couldn't afford market rent anywhere. David offered us this place for $800 a month when comparable rentals were going for $1,400. He ever explain why? I asked. He said he remembered what it was like to struggle, that he wanted to help young families get established. Marcus looked confused. Is everything okay? Jake mentioned there might be changes. Jake shifted uncomfortably. We're just reviewing all of David's arrangements. Nothing's changing right now. The third property stopped me cold. It was Margaret's house, the modest ranch-style home where David had grown up. According to the deed, David had purchased it in 2019 for $180,000. Jake, I said slowly. Margaret owns this house, right? Well, technically. Jake looked miserable. David bought it when Mom was facing foreclosure. But she doesn't know he owns it. What do you mean she doesn't know? The foreclosure proceedings were happening fast. David had to act quickly, so he bought it through an LLC and let Mom think the bank had worked out a payment plan with her. Jake unlocked the front door. She's been making what she thinks are mortgage payments to the bank, but they're actually rent payments to David's property company. I walked through the house where David had grown up, seeing it with new eyes. The kitchen he'd learned to cook in, the living room where he'd done homework while his mother screamed about money. He'd saved this house not because he loved it, but because he couldn't bear to see his family homeless. How much has Margaret been paying in mortgage payments? $1,500 a month. David set it up to match what her original mortgage payment was, so she's been paying David $1,500 a month, while he was also sending her $2,000 a month in support. Yeah. He never told her the house was paid off through the purchase. She thinks she still owes $120,000 to the bank. The cruel irony was staggering. Margaret had been living rent-free in a house her son owned while simultaneously taking his money under false pretenses and gambling it away. David had been supporting her to the tune of $3,500 a month more than I made at my job. While she convinced him she was struggling financially, Lisa found David's property management office in the converted garage. File cabinets held meticulous records of every repair, every rent payment, every interaction with tenants. David had been more than a landlord, he'd been a community caretaker. Look at this, Lisa said, pulling out a folder marked Emergency Fund. Inside were records of rent forgiveness, emergency repairs paid out of pocket, even grocery gift cards given to struggling tenants. David was running a one-man social service agency. Mrs. Henderson's heat pump died last winter, Jake explained. David paid for a new unit himself rather than raise her rent to cover the cost. He did stuff like that constantly. I sat in David's desk chair, surrounded by evidence of his secret generosity. While I thought we were barely scraping by, he'd been quietly changing lives. The rental income that could have made our life comfortable had instead been flowing to his mother and his tenants in equal measure. There's something else, Jake said, pulling out a thick manila envelope. David was planning to expand. He'd been saving for a down payment on a fourth property, a small apartment building that would provide housing for single mothers. Business plan was detailed and compassionate. David had researched the need for affordable housing for women leaving abusive relationships, calculated costs, even identified a property manager who specialized in trauma-informed housing practices. He was going to call it Sarah's Place, Jake said quietly. After you. He wanted to surprise you with it after the baby was born. I pressed my hands to my pregnant belly, feeling David's presence stronger than ever. He hadn't just left me money, he'd left me a mission. Jake, I need to ask you something directly. If Margaret finds out she's been living in a house David owned, what do you think she'd do? Honestly, she'd probably have a complete breakdown. Her entire narrative about being financially responsible while David struggled will collapse. She's built her identity around being the long-suffering mother who sacrificed for her ungrateful children. And if she has a breakdown, she becomes dangerous. To herself, to others, to anyone she blames for her situation. Jake looked directly at me. Sarah, if Margaret realizes that David was basically subsidizing her entire life while she was gambling away his support money, she'd blame you for exposing her. And desperate, humiliated people do desperate things. As we locked up the property management office, I made a decision. Margaret wanted a war over David's legacy? Fine, but she was about to discover that David's legacy wasn't just money. It was a network of people whose lives he'd touched, who'd be willing to testify about the kind of man he really was. And more importantly, she was about to learn that the woman carrying his son was stronger than she'd ever imagined. I decided it was time to stop being reactive and start being strategic. Margaret wanted a family meeting? Fine, But this time, it would be on my terms. In my house, with my evidence. I called Jake first. I want to have dinner with your family, tomorrow night, all of you. Sarah, I don't think that's a good idea. Mom's been unstable since your last conversation. Perfect. Then she'd be off balance when I reveal what I know. What are you planning? To end this harassment campaign permanently. Tell Margaret the first have a proposition about David's inheritance. Tell her I'm ready to be reasonable. Jake's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally. You're playing with fire, Sarah. Margaret started this fire. I'm just going to control the burn. The next evening, Margaret arrived with Jake and Emma in tow, her expression a mixture of triumph and suspicion. She'd dressed for battle in a severe black suit that made her look like she was attending another funeral. I'm glad you've come to your senses, she said, settling into my living room like she owned it. Pregnancy hormones can make women irrational, but I knew you'd eventually see reason. I served dinner in my dining room, using the good china David and I had received as wedding gifts. Throughout the meal, I made small talk about the baby, my doctor's appointments, names I was considering. Margaret tolerated it with barely concealed impatience. Enough pleasantries, she finally said as I cleared the dessert plates. What's your proposal? I returned from the kitchen carrying a manila envelope thick with documents. Actually, Margaret, I want to make you a different kind of offer. I spread David's property deeds across the table, watching her face as recognition dawned. I know about the rental properties, all 3 of them. So? David mentioned he had some investments, including this one. I placed the deed to her house, directly in front of her. 1247 Oakwood Drive, purchased by David Mitchell through Mitchell Property Management LLC on March 15, 2019, for $180,000 cash. Margaret's face went white as she stared at the document. That's impossible. This is my house. I have a mortgage. No, Margaret, you have a rental agreement. You've been paying David $1,500 a month in rent while he was also sending you $2,000 a month in support. He was essentially paying himself to let you live in the house he bought, to save you from foreclosure. Emma gasped. Jake closed his eyes and shook his head. Margaret just stared at the deed like it might disappear if she looked hard enough. This can't be right. David was struggling financially. He could barely afford his own rent. David was worth over $2 million when he died. I placed the bank statements next to the deed. He owned 3 rental properties generating $8,500 monthly income, had substantial savings and investments, and was secretly supporting his tenants and his family while living modestly to maintain the illusion that he was barely scraping by. You're lying. David would have told me. Would he? The same way you told him about your gambling addiction. I placed Margaret's credit card statements on the table. Twin Rivers Casino. 3 times a week for the past 4 years. You've been taking David's support money and gambling it away while pretending to struggle with basic expenses. Margaret's composure finally cracked. You have no right to investigate my personal finances. I have every right to understand why my dead husband's mother is pressuring me to abort his child. I stood up, placing my hands protectively over my pregnant belly. David was supporting you to the tune of $3,500 a month, Margaret. He saved your house, covered your real expenses, and sent you additional money that you promptly gambled away. And somehow, in your twisted logic, the problem is that I'm carrying his son. That baby changes everything. The inheritance gets complicated, only if you're planning to challenge it. Which brings me to my ultimatum. I pulled out the final document, a draft eviction notice that Rebecca had prepared. You have a choice, Margaret. You can stop harassing me about my pregnancy, respect my role as David's widow, and continue living in the house he bought for you, or you can keep fighting me and discover what it's like to actually struggle financially. Margaret stared at the eviction notice, her hands shaking. You can't throw me out of my own home. It's not your home. It's my home now. David left it to me, along with everything else. I've been generous enough to let you continue living here, but that generosity has limits. Jake finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, you need to stop. Sarah's being more than fair. Fair? She's trying to destroy our family. You destroyed our family the moment you started gambling away David's support money while manipulating him with fake crises. I sat back down, my voice calm but firm. David was planning to cut contact with you after the baby was born. He'd figured out your games, Margaret. The only reason he didn't act on it was because he died first. That's not true. David loved his family. David loved the family he thought he had. But he was starting to see the family he actually had. I placed David's childhood diary on the table. He kept records, Margaret. Years of emotional manipulation, financial exploitation, and psychological abuse. He was planning to break the cycle with his own child. Margaret's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the desperate, cornered woman underneath. You think you're so smart, Sarah? You think you've won? You have no idea what real desperation looks like. When people have nothing left to lose, they do things that can't be taken back. Is that a threat? It's a promise. You want to play hardball? Fine, but remember, I know where you live, where you work, what time you leave for your doctor's appointments. Accidents happen to pregnant women all the time. The room went deadly silent. Jake's face had gone ashen, and Emma was staring at her mother-in-law in horror. Mum, Jake said carefully, you need to stop talking. But Margaret was beyond caring about consequences. David protected you from reality, Sarah, but David's not here anymore. And reality is coming for you whether you're ready or not. I reached for my phone and hit record. Margaret, I need you to repeat that threat, for legal purposes. She realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late. The words were out, witnessed by her own son and daughter-in-law. Get out of my house, I said quietly. All of you. And Margaret, the eviction notice becomes official tomorrow. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. As they gathered their things to leave, Jake paused at my front door. Sarah, I'm sorry. She's not the mother who raised us. Yes, she is, I replied. That's exactly who she's always been. David just protected you from seeing it. After they left, I sat in my quiet house, one hand on my pregnant belly, the other holding my phone with Margaret's recorded threat. The harassment campaign was over, but I had a feeling the real war was just beginning. Jake called me at 6 a.m. the next morning, his voice strained and exhausted. Sarah, I need to see you, alone. Can you meet me at David's property management office? Is this about last night? It's about everything, Moms. God, Sarah, I don't even know where to start. I found Jake sitting in David's desk chair, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. In front of him was a handwritten letter on his personal letterhead. I'm resigning from managing the properties, he said without preamble, and I'm cutting ties with my mother. Jake, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I've been enabling her for years, telling myself I was protecting the family. But there is no family anymore. There's just Mom's addiction and the people she's willing to sacrifice to feed it. He handed me the resignation letter. It was formal, professional, and heartbreaking. I stayed up all night thinking about what she said to you, the threat. Sarah, my mother threatened the life of her own grandchild. There's no coming back from that. What happened after you left my house? Jake rubbed his face with both hands. She went completely off the rails. Started talking about how you'd poisoned me against her, how David had always been her favorite, and now you were stealing his memory. She said double quote. He paused, struggling with the words. She said maybe it would be better for everyone if something happened to you during childbirth, that it would solve all the problems at once. I felt cold despite the warm morning air. She said that in front of Emma. Emma left. Just packed a bag and walked out. She's staying at her sister's place. Jake looked up at me with David's eyes filled with pain. Mom's been calling me all night, alternating between crying about how everyone's abandoned her and ranting about how she's going to make you pay for destroying the family. Jake, I need to ask you something difficult. Do you think Margaret is capable of actually hurting me? He was quiet for a long moment. The Margaret I grew up with. No, but this desperate, cornered version of her, I honestly don't know. When David and I were kids, she used to threaten to kill herself whenever we didn't do what she wanted. She'd stand in the kitchen with a knife to her wrist, crying about how we were driving her to suicide. That's psychological abuse. I know that now. But back then, it felt like life or death. We'd do anything to make her put the knife down. Jake stood up and walked to the window. The threats escalated over time. When Lisa tried to leave for college, Mom threatened to burn down the house with all of Lisa's belongings inside. We thought she was just being dramatic until we found the gas can in her bedroom. Jesus, Lisa never knew about that. David and I hid it from her, convinced Mom to get help instead of calling the police. The help lasted about 6 weeks before she decided she was cured. I thought about Margaret's history of psychiatric holds, her pattern of creating crises to control family members. Jake, I need you to be completely honest with me. If Margaret decides I'm the reason for all her problems, what's the worst-case scenario? Jake turned back to me, his expression grim. The worst case? She tries to hurt you in a way that looks like an accident. She's intelligent enough to plan something that wouldn't obviously point back to her. He paused. But Sarah, there's something else. Mom's not just angry about the money anymore. She's fixated on the baby. What do you mean? She keeps talking about how David would still be alive if you hadn't gotten pregnant. In her mind, your pregnancy put pressure on David to work harder, take more risks. And that's what killed him. She's convinced herself that the baby is somehow responsible for David's death. That's insane. Of course it is. But Mom's not thinking rationally anymore. She's created this narrative where you and the baby are the villains, and she's the victim trying to save what's left of the family. Jake pulled out his phone and showed me a text message from Margaret. If you won't help me stop this madness, I'll handle it myself. Some things are more important than family loyalty. When did she send this? An hour ago. Sarah, I think you need to consider staying somewhere else for a while. Maybe with Lisa, until we can figure out how dangerous Mom actually is. I stood up, placing my hand on my belly where David's son was growing stronger every day. No, I'm not running from Margaret. This is my home and I'm not letting her scare me away. Then at least let me help you. I know Mom's patterns, her habits. If she's planning something, I might be able to predict it. Why would you do that? She's your mother. Jake was quiet for a moment, staring at David's property management files. Because David trusted me to take care of these properties, and that included taking care of you. I failed him by not standing up to Mom sooner, but I won't fail him again. He opened his laptop and started typing. I'm going to document everything: Mom's threats, her financial desperation, the pattern of escalating behavior. If something happens to you, I want there to be a clear trail pointing to her. Jake, I'm also going to start monitoring her activities, where she goes, who she talks to, what she's planning. Consider it protective surveillance. You'd spy on your own mother? To protect my nephew? Absolutely. Jake's voice was firm with new resolve. David died trying to break the cycle of abuse in our family. The least I can do is make sure his son gets the chance to grow up free from Margaret's toxicity. As I left the office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since David's death hope. Margaret had lost her primary ally. Jake's defection wasn't just strategic, it was moral. And for the first time in this entire nightmare, someone from David's family was choosing to protect his child instead of sacrifice it. But I also felt a new level of fear. A desperate Margaret was dangerous enough. A desperate Margaret with nothing left to lose was potentially lethal. I needed to prepare for whatever she was planning, because I was certain she was planning something Rebecca didn't waste time with pleasantries when I called her about Margaret's escalating threats. We're hiring a private investigator immediately. If Margaret's as desperate as you describe, We need to know exactly what she's capable of. Is that really necessary? Sarah, she threatened you and your unborn child in front of witnesses. In my experience, people who make those kinds of threats are usually building up to acting on them. The private investigator Rebecca recommended was a former police detective named Carmen Rodriguez, no relation to Lisa, despite the shared surname. Carmen had specialized in domestic violence cases and understood the psychology of family-based threats. The pattern you're describing is classic escalation, Carmen explained during our first meeting. Financial desperation plus perceived betrayal, plus substance abuse, in this case, gambling addiction, creates a perfect storm for violence. What exactly are you going to investigate? Everything. Margaret's current financial situation, her daily routines, her associates, her communications. If she's planning something, there will be signs. Carmen pulled out a contract. I also want to install a security system at your house and provide you with personal protection devices. You think I'm in actual physical danger? I think you're dealing with someone who has nothing left to lose and blames you for taking it away. That's the most dangerous type of person in domestic situations. Carmen worked fast. Within 48 hours, she had assembled a comprehensive dossier on Margaret that was even more damning than our amateur investigation had revealed. Your mother-in-law owes $347,000 to various creditors, Carmen reported. But here's the interesting part: $180,000 of that debt is to loan sharks, not traditional lenders. Loan sharks? High-interest predatory lenders who operate outside normal banking regulations. These aren't people who send threatening letters and wait for payment. They collect debts through intimidation and violence. Carmen showed me surveillance. Photos of Margaret meeting with two men in a casino parking lot. These gentlemen have criminal records for assault, extortion, and debt collection violence. Margaret borrowed $50,000 from them 6 months ago at 30% weekly interest. Weekly? Which means she now owes them approximately $180,000, and the debt is growing exponentially. These men visited Margaret's house twice last week. I studied the photos, seeing Margaret's face clearly showing fear and desperation. So she's not just financially desperate, she's in physical danger herself. Exactly. Which makes her incredibly dangerous to you. People being threatened by loan sharks will do anything to raise money, including violence against family members. Carmen's investigation revealed more disturbing details. Margaret had been asking questions about my daily routine, had driven by my house at odd hours, and had been researching pregnancy complications online. She's also been in contact with a disreputable lawyer who specializes in challenging wills and estates. Carmen continued. Guy named Patterson, who's been censured by the Bar Association twice for unethical practices. What kind of unethical practices? Encouraging false claims, manufacturing evidence, intimidating witnesses. He's the kind of lawyer you hire when you don't have a legitimate case but want to cause maximum damage anyway. The most chilling discovery was Margaret's recent internet search history, which Carmen had obtained through methods I chose not to question. She's been researching accidents that commonly happen to pregnant women. Falls downstairs, car accidents, household chemical exposure. She's also been looking up pregnancy complications that could justify emergency medical intervention. You mean she's researching ways to hurt me that would look accidental? Or ways to cause a miscarriage that could be attributed to natural causes? I felt sick. What about Jake's surveillance? Has he seen anything? Actually, yes. Jake provided some crucial information. Carmen pulled out her phone and showed me a text screenshot. Margaret sent this to Jake yesterday. If Sarah loses the baby naturally, all our problems go away. Sometimes nature needs help. That's basically a confession of intent. It's evidence of premeditation. Combined with her financial desperation and the loan shark pressure, we have a compelling case that Margaret poses a credible threat to you and your baby. Carmen recommended involving law enforcement, but I hesitated. What if we're wrong? What if she's just desperate and talking big but wouldn't actually hurt anyone? Sarah, I've been doing this for 15 years. People don't research accidental ways to harm pregnant women unless they're planning to use that information. Carmen's expression was serious. Your mother-in-law has motive that inheritance money she needs to pay off dangerous creditors. She has opportunity, she knows your routines and has access to your environment. And she's demonstrated intent through her threats and research. So what do? We get a restraining order based on her documented threats. We install comprehensive security at your home. And we prepare evidence for criminal charges if she acts on any of her plans. Carmen handed me a small device that looked like a car key fob. This is a personal alarm system. If you feel threatened, press this button and it will alert me, the police, and Rebecca simultaneously. It also starts recording audio and video. That evening, I sat in my newly secured home, looking at the pile of evidence Carmen had assembled. Margaret wasn't just a grieving mother-in-law struggling with her son's death, she was a desperate woman in debt to dangerous people, researching ways to harm her own grandchild for financial gain. Jake called as I was reviewing the restraining order paperwork. Sarah, Mom's gone. What do you mean gone? She left the house this morning and hasn't come back. Her car's missing, her purse is gone, but she left everything else behind. It's like she just vanished. Did she say anything about where she was going? Nothing. But Sarah... Jake's voice was tight with worry. She took Dad's old hunting rifle. I felt my blood turn to ice. Jake, you need to call the police. Now. I already did. They're treating it as a missing person case, but they said unless she makes a specific threat, they can't do much. She did make a specific threat. Carmen has it documented. Then maybe it's time to involve the authorities officially. As I hung up, I realized Margaret's disappearance wasn't random, it was strategic. She'd vanished just as we were preparing legal action against her, taking a weapon with her. The hunting phase of this nightmare was beginning, and I was the prey. The ultrasound appointment that revealed my baby's gender had been scheduled for weeks, but it took on new significance now that Margaret had disappeared with a weapon. Carmen insisted on accompanying me to the doctor's office, and Jake met us there as part of his protective surveillance. We're having a boy, I told them, as we sat in Dr. Martinez's waiting room afterward, clutching the ultrasound photos. In the grainy black and white image, I could see David's profile, the same strong jaw, the same determined expression even in the womb. David would have been so excited, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. He always said he wanted a son, to take camping and teach to fish. I pressed the ultrasound photo against my chest, feeling the baby kick as if he knew we were talking about him. David Jr., I said. That's his name. David Mitchell Jr. That's perfect, Jake smiled through his tears. Mum always said David looked exactly like Dad when he was born. Maybe the cycle will repeat with something positive this time. Carmen had been unusually quiet during the appointment, frequently checking her phone and scanning the parking lot. As we prepared to leave, she pulled me aside. Sarah, I need you to know Margaret's been spotted. A casino security camera caught her at Twin Rivers yesterday morning. She's not just missing. She's actively avoiding detection while staying close, enough to monitor you. What does that mean? It means she's planning something specific that requires her to be nearby, but unseen. We need to accelerate our legal protections. That afternoon, Rebecca filed for an emergency restraining order based on Margaret's documented threats and disappearance with a weapon. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd clearly dealt with family violence cases before, didn't hesitate. Mrs. Mitchell has made specific threats against a pregnant woman and has access to firearms. This restraining order is granted immediately, with a hearing scheduled for next week. But even as we celebrated this legal victory, Carmen remained concerned. Restraining orders are just paper, Sarah. They don't stop bullets or prevent accidents. Margaret's desperation has reached a level where legal consequences probably don't matter to her anymore. That evening, I was arranging David's baby photos next to the new ultrasound images when my doorbell rang. Through the security camera Carmen had installed, I saw Emma standing on my porch, looking nervous and exhausted. "Sarah, please let me in. I have information about Margaret you need to hear." I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Where have you been, Emma?" "Hiding from my mother-in-law." "Can we talk?" "It's important." Once Emma was inside, she collapsed into my living room chair like she'd been carrying an enormous weight. "I've been staying at my sister's place since that dinner, trying to process everything I learned about Margaret's behavior. Jake told me you left. I couldn't stay in that house knowing what I know now." "Sarah, Margaret didn't just threaten you that night. She's been planning something for weeks." Emma pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of text messages. "These are from Margaret to Jake over the past month. I took pictures before I left." The messages were chilling in their calculated nature. Sarah's pregnancy is high risk. At her age, accidents happen to careless pregnant women all the time. Sometimes loss brings families together. "There are more," Emma continued. "She's been researching your doctor's appointments, your work schedule, even your grocery shopping routine. Jake didn't know I was documenting it, but I was getting scared." "Why didn't you tell anyone sooner?" "Because I thought she was just grieving and saying things she didn't mean." But then she started talking about solving the problem permanently and asking Jake about his father's hunting equipment. Emma's hands shook as she scrolled through more messages. "Sarah, I think she's been planning to hurt you since the week after David's funeral." Emma showed me the most disturbing message, sent 3 days before Margaret disappeared. "If something happens to Sarah during a break-in, the grief might cause a miscarriage. 2 problems solved with 1 tragedy." I felt the baby kick hard, as if he could sense the danger surrounding us. "Emma, you have to give this information to the police." "I already did. I went to the station before coming here." Emma looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. I was scared of destroying Jake's relationship with his mother, but now I realize she's already destroyed it herself." "Where do you think Margaret is now?" "I don't know, but Jake's been tracking unusual charges on her credit cards. She's been staying in cheap motels about an hour away, paying cash for everything. She's also been buying things that don't make sense: rope, duct tape, cleaning supplies." Carmen arrived as Emma was finishing her account, having been alerted by the security system. After reviewing Emma's evidence, Carmen's expression was grim. "This changes everything. Margaret isn't just desperate, she's operational. She's been conducting surveillance and gathering materials for what looks like a planned attack." "What kind of attack?" "The kind designed to look like a random crime. Break-in gone wrong, robbery that turns violent, home invasion by unknown assailants." Carmen pulled out her laptop. "Emma's evidence shows premeditation going back weeks. This isn't a grief-driven impulse, it's a calculated plan to eliminate you and the baby." I looked down at the ultrasound photo in my hands, at David Jr.'s tiny profile so clearly resembling his father. Margaret wanted to erase this child, to eliminate the last piece of David that existed in this world. "Not happening," I said firmly. "David died protecting his co-workers from that falling beam. I'll be damned if I let his mother hurt his son." Carmen nodded approvingly. "Good, because tomorrow we're going public with everything we know. Margaret's been operating in secret, counting on family loyalty and shame to keep her behavior hidden. Time to drag it all into the light." Emma looked confused. "What do you mean, going public?" "I mean, we're going to make Margaret's threats and behavior so widely known that if anything happens to Sarah, every law enforcement agency in the state will know exactly who to investigate." Carmen's smile was sharp. "Margaret wanted to play games in the shadows. Let's see how she handles being the main suspect in every newspaper and police report." For the first time since David's death, I felt truly hopeful. My son had won his first victory, not through violence or manipulation, but through the simple power of people choosing to do the right thing. Emma's courage in coming forward, Jake's decision to protect his nephew over his mother, Carmen's professional expertise, Rebecca's legal advocacy, David Jr. already had an army of protectors. Margaret could disappear into the shadows, but we were bringing the fight into the light. The media strategy worked faster than any of us had anticipated. By noon the next day, Margaret's story was local news. Grieving mother-in-law threatens pregnant widow over inheritance. The article included quotes from Emma about the documented threats and from Jake about Margaret's financial desperation. But it was the detail about David's secret generosity that captured public attention. The story of a construction worker who quietly accumulated millions while supporting struggling tenants, and his gambling-addicted mother resonated with readers. David became a posthumous hero, and Margaret became the villain trying to destroy his legacy. Carmen called me at 2 p.m. with an update. Margaret's been spotted. Casino security cameras show her watching the news coverage of her story. She looked unhinged. Where is she now? Unknown. But Sarah, she's going to act soon. The media attention has eliminated her ability to make your death look accidental. If she's going to do something, it'll have to be desperate and obvious. That evening, I was reviewing financial documents with Rebecca when my security system chimed. Through the camera, I saw Margaret standing at my front door, no longer trying to hide. She looked like she'd aged years in the few days since her disappearance, hair unkempt, clothes wrinkled, eyes wild with desperation. "Sarah," she called out, knowing I could hear her through the intercom. "We need to talk. I have something that belongs to David." Carmen, who'd been monitoring my security feed, was already on her way. "Don't open that door, Sarah. Keep her talking until I arrive." I activated the intercom. "What do you want, Margaret?" "I found something in David's things. A letter he wrote to the baby. You'll want to see it." My heart clenched. David had mentioned writing letters to our future children, dreams for their lives, advice for growing up. I'd never found any letters in his belongings. "Show me the letter through the camera." Margaret held up an envelope with David's handwriting. "For my son or daughter, to be opened on their 18th birthday." Seeing David's careful script brought tears to my eyes. "Where did you find this?" "In his old bedroom at my house. Hidden behind a loose baseboard." Margaret's voice took on a pleading tone. "Sarah, I know we've had our differences, but this letter is important. David wrote it before he died, when he was planning for the baby's future. Read it to me through the intercom. It's private, between David and his child. But I'll give it to you if you let me inside. We can end this fighting, Sarah, for the baby's sake." I could see Carmen's car pulling into my driveway, but Margaret's back was to the street. The letter looked genuine, David's handwriting, the kind of envelope he would have chosen. But everything about this situation felt wrong. "Margaret, I can't let you inside. The restraining order. Forget the restraining order. This is about David's final wishes for his child." Margaret's composure cracked completely. "You've turned everyone against me, destroyed my relationship with my sons, made me out to be some kind of monster. The least you can do is let me deliver my dead son's letter to his baby." Through the camera, I saw her fumble with something in her pocket. Carmen was approaching the front porch, her hand resting on what I assumed was a weapon. "Sarah," Margaret continued, her voice breaking, "I know I've made mistakes. The gambling, the pressure about the abortion, all of it. I was desperate and scared. But this letter, it's the last piece of David I have to give." Carmen appeared behind Margaret, speaking in a calm, professional voice. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the door. You're violating a restraining order." Margaret spun around, clutching the letter to her chest. "This is between family. You have no right. Actually, I have every right. You're trespassing and violating a court order." That's when I saw what Margaret had been fumbling with in her pocket, a small revolver. Probably her late husband's old gun. She didn't point it at Carmen, but she held it visibly, like a negotiating tool. "I just want to give David's letter to his baby. That's all. Then I'll go." Carmen remained calm, her training evident. "Ma'am, you need to put the weapon down. Let's Talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. Everyone's made up their minds about me. I'm the evil mother-in-law, the gambling addict, the woman who threatened her grandchild. Margaret's voice rose to a near shriek. But I loved David more than anyone. I sacrificed everything for that boy. Then honor his memory by doing the right thing now, Carmen said gently. Put the gun down and give me the letter. Sarah will read it, and David's wishes will be respected. For a moment, Margaret seemed to consider this. Then her expression hardened into something cold and calculating. David's wishes? His wish was to cut me out of his life, to poison his child against me before it was even born. She looked directly into the security camera. Well, if I can't be part of this baby's life, maybe there shouldn't be a baby's life to be part of. She raised the gun, not toward Carmen, but toward my front door. In that moment, I understood her plan. She was going to shoot through the door, hoping to hit me inside. Carmen moved faster than I would have thought possible, tackling Margaret before she could fire. The gun went off, the shot going wild into my front yard. As both women hit the ground, police sirens were already approaching. Carmen had called for backup the moment she'd seen the weapon. Within minutes, my quiet residential street was flooded with squad cars and an ambulance. Margaret was arrested on charges of violating a restraining order, criminal threats, and attempted assault with a deadly weapon. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked back at my house one last time. That baby will never know peace, she shouted. I'll make sure of it. But her words felt empty now. The desperate threat of a broken woman who'd lost everything through her own choices. Carmen handed me the letter Margaret had been carrying. We'll need to examine this as evidence, but I wanted you to see it first. I opened the envelope with trembling hands and found David's familiar handwriting. My dearest child, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but you're here, and that makes everything worthwhile. Your mother is the strongest, most loving woman I know. Trust her, learn from her, and know that you were wanted and loved before you were even born. Build a life of kindness, work hard for what matters, and remember that family isn't just about blood, it's about the people who choose to love and protect you. I'll be watching over you always. Love, Dad. There was no mention of Margaret, no instructions about honoring his mother, or maintaining family relationships. David's final message to his son was about love, strength, and choosing your own family. Margaret's last manipulation had backfired completely, delivering a message that undermined everything she'd been fighting for. Margaret's arrest made regional news, not just because of the dramatic confrontation, but because the investigation that followed revealed the full scope of her financial crimes. When police searched her motel room, they found detailed plans for staging my murder, including maps of my neighborhood, photos of my daily routine, and research on how long it would take police to respond to emergency calls in my area. The district attorney, a tough prosecutor named Maria Santos, didn't hesitate to file serious charges. This wasn't a crime of passion or grief-driven desperation, she told the media. This was a calculated plan to murder a pregnant woman for financial gain. We're treating it accordingly. Margaret was charged with attempted murder, stalking, criminal threats, violation of a restraining order, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Emma's documented text messages, Carmen's surveillance reports, the materials found in her motel room, and her own recorded threats. But the legal consequences were only part of the story. Margaret's loan shark. Creditors, seeing their debtor arrested and facing potential decades in prison, moved quickly to cut their losses. They filed liens against her house, the house David had actually owned, and began liquidating her remaining assets. Ironically, Rebecca explained during one of our meetings, Margaret's criminal behavior has actually simplified your legal situation. Her arrest invalidates any claims she might have made against David's estate, and her creditors have no legal standing to pursue assets that never belonged to her. Jake had been devastated by his mother's arrest, but also relieved. I keep thinking about all the time she manipulated us as kids, he told me during one of our property management meetings. The fake emergencies, the threats of suicide, the way she'd pit David and me against each other. I used to think it was just how families were. What's your plan now? I want to keep managing the properties, if you'll have me. David trusted me with this work, and I think I can honor his memory by continuing what he started. Jake handed me a folder. I've been working on that project David mentioned, the housing for single mothers. I think we should call it David's place, not Sarah's place, his vision, his legacy. Emma had filed for divorce, unable to reconcile Jake's family history with her own values. But she remained supportive of our efforts to expose Margaret's abuse patterns. I've been talking to other people Margaret manipulated over the years, Emma told me. Neighbors, former friends, even some of David's high school girlfriends. There's a pattern going back decades. She destroyed relationships, spread lies, created chaos wherever she went. The most surprising development came when Lisa returned from Portland with legal documents of her own. I'm petitioning the court to have Margaret declared mentally incompetent to handle financial matters, she announced. It won't affect her criminal charges, but it will prevent her from accumulating more debt or making financial decisions that could impact the family in the future. Can you do that? With her history of psychiatric holds, her documented gambling addiction, and now her criminal charges, yes, it's called a conservatorship. I'll have legal authority over any assets she might have and can prevent her from creating new debts. The hearing for Margaret's mental competency took place 3 weeks after her arrest. Margaret appeared in court wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hair grey and unkempt, looking nothing like the composed woman who had terrorized me for months. Her lawyer, a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, tried to argue that Margaret's behavior was driven by grief and financial pressure, not mental illness. But the evidence was 2 extensive decades of manipulative behavior, escalating threats, and finally a planned murder attempt. Judge Williams, the same judge who had granted my restraining order, didn't hesitate. Mrs. Mitchell has demonstrated a pattern of behavior that poses a danger to herself and others. This court grants the petition for conservatorship. Ms. Lisa Mitchell Rodriguez is hereby appointed as conservator of Margaret Mitchell's affairs. After the hearing, I found myself face to face with Margaret for the first time since her arrest. She was being led back to the holding area when she saw me and stopped. "Sarah," she said, her voice very different from the threatening tone I remembered. "I want you to know, I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, Margaret. You planned to kill me and my baby. I was desperate. The debt, the pressure, everything was falling apart." She looked down at her shackled hands. "I convinced myself that the baby was the problem, that if there was no baby, everything would go back to how it was before. Back to David supporting your gambling addiction while you manipulated him with fake crises." Margaret's composure cracked slightly. He was happy to help. He loved taking care of his family. He was happy to help because he thought you needed help. There's a difference between family support and financial abuse. You'll never understand what it's like to lose everything, to watch your family slip away piece by piece. I placed my hand on my pregnant belly, where David Jr. was growing strong and healthy. "You're right, Margaret. I'll never understand how someone could threaten their own grandchild. And I'm grateful for that." As the bailiff led Margaret away, she called back one final time. "That baby will ask about me someday. What will you tell him?" "The truth," I replied. "That his father protected him from you even after death." 2 months later, Margaret pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a sentence of 15 years in prison. She would be eligible for parole in 10 years, but with her age and health issues, it was unlikely she'd ever be released. The insurance money, inheritance and property income were finally mine to manage without interference. I used part of it to establish the David Mitchell Memorial Fund, providing housing assistance for families affected by domestic violence. But the real victory wasn't financial, it was freedom. David Jr. would grow up without Margaret's toxicity, surrounded instead by people who chose to love and protect him. Justice, it turned out, wasn't just about punishment. It was about breaking cycles and choosing better. David Jr. arrived on September 15th, exactly on his due date, as if he'd been listening to his father's careful planning even from the womb. Labor was long but uncomplicated, and when Dr. Martinez placed my son in my arms, I saw David's eyes looking back at me, the same warm brown eyes that had fallen in love with me, that had dreamed of this moment. "He looks just like his daddy," Lisa whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held her nephew for the first time. David would have been so proud. Jake had been pacing the hospital waiting room for 12 hours, more nervous than any uncle had a right to be. When I invited him to hold David Jr., his hands shook as he cradled the tiny life that represented his brother's legacy. "Hey there, little man," Jake murmured. "You have no idea how many people fought to protect you before you even got here." Emmy had come to the hospital despite their divorce proceedings, bringing a handmade quilt she'd sewn during Margaret's trial. "I wanted him to have something beautiful from this side of the family," she explained. "Something that wasn't touched by all the ugliness." The most surprising visitor was Mrs. Henderson from the duplex, who arrived with a casserole and a story. "That made me cry. David came to see me the week before he died," she said, settling into the hospital chair with practiced ease. "He was so excited about the baby, showed me ultrasound pictures, talked about teaching him to throw a baseball, but he also made me promise something." "What kind of promise?" "If anything ever happened to him, I was to make sure you knew how much he loved you both. He said he worried that his family might try to make you feel unwelcome, and he wanted you to know that you belonged." Mrs. Henderson pulled out a worn envelope. "He left this with me for safekeeping." Inside was a letter addressed to me in David's handwriting, dated just days before his accident. "Sarah, if you're reading this, something's happened to me, but you're holding our baby, which means everything turned out okay. I know my family can be difficult. Mum especially has a way of making people feel like they don't belong. But you and our child are my real family now. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Build a life full of love and kindness, and know that I'll be watching over both of you always. You're stronger than you know. Love, David." David Jr. slept peacefully through my tears, as if he understood that these were happy tears, healing tears. Recovery was easier than I'd expected, partly because I wasn't facing it alone. Lisa had taken extended leave from her job in Portland to help with the transition, and Jake stopped by daily to check on us and handle any property management issues. "I've been thinking about what David would want for his son," Jake said one afternoon as we watched David Jr. sleep in his crib. "Not just financially, but the kind of life he'd want him to have. What do you think that would be?" "Normal, stable, free from all the dysfunction that poisoned our childhood." Jake looked around the nursery I'd decorated in soft blues and greens. "This feels like the kind of home David dreamed of growing up in." Carmen continued providing security consultation during my first months as a new mother, but more as a friend than a professional necessity. Margaret was safely in prison, serving her sentence and reportedly showing signs of genuine mental health improvement, with proper medication and therapy. Prison psychiatrists think she has bipolar disorder that was never properly diagnosed, Carmen explained during one of her visits. The gambling addiction was likely self-medication for mood swings she didn't understand. Does that excuse what she did? Not at all. But it might explain it. Mental illness doesn't justify threatening your grandchild, but it might help us understand how someone could become that desperate. The most meaningful moment came when David Jr. was 6 weeks old. I was sitting in the rocking chair David had insisted on buying, feeding our son in the quiet of early morning, when I felt David's presence more strongly than ever before. I imagined him watching us, proud of the son who had his eyes and his stubborn determination. Proud of me for protecting that son from the toxicity that had shaped David's own childhood. Proud that his legacy wasn't just money or property, but a child who would grow up surrounded by love and truth. Your daddy was a good man, I whispered to David Jr. as he drifted back to sleep. He worked hard, he helped people, and he loved us more than anything. You're going to hear different stories about his family as you grow up. But remember this, he chose love over loyalty, truth over tradition, and protecting you over pleasing them. Rebecca stopped by with the final legal documents that officially established David Jr.'s trust fund and inheritance rights. He's set for life, she said, watching him sleep. College, medical care, a house when he's ready. David planned for everything. What about Margaret? Could she ever challenge any of this? From prison, with a conservatorship and a criminal record? Not a chance. Besides, Lisa's been incredibly thorough about documenting Margaret's financial crimes. If anything, Margaret owes the estate money. As autumn turned to winter, I settled into the rhythm of single motherhood, but I wasn't truly single. I had Lisa's fierce protectiveness, Jake's steady support, Emma's unexpected friendship, and a community of tenants who had loved David and now watched over his son. David Jr. thrived, growing bigger and stronger each week, his personality already showing signs of his father's gentle determination. He slept well, ate enthusiastically, and seemed to find joy in the simplest things, a shaft of sunlight through the window, the sound of Lisa's laughter, the mobile Jake had hung over his crib. He's going to be happy, Lisa observed one evening as we watched him discover his own hands with fascination. Whatever else happens in his life, he's starting from a place of love and security. David would be so grateful. I looked around our home filled with people who had chosen to be family, who had fought for truth and protected innocence. This was what David had dreamed of when he'd planned our future, not wealth or status, but peace and love and the chance for his son to grow up free from the patterns that had damaged previous generations. David Jr. would know his father's story, but he wouldn't be defined by his family's dysfunction. He would know that people had fought for him before he was born, that love had triumphed over manipulation. That truth was stronger than family loyalty. That was the real inheritance David had left us, not money, but freedom. 1 year after David Jr.'s birth, I stood in the conference room of Rebecca's law office, officially signing the papers that established David's place, the transitional housing program for single mothers that had been my husband's final dream. 12 units, on-site childcare, job training programs, and counseling services. Rebecca read from the development proposal. It's exactly what David outlined in his notes. Jake had worked tirelessly to make the project reality, securing permits, hiring contractors, and coordinating with social service agencies. David always said he wanted to break cycles, Jake explained to the gathered reporters covering the ribbon-cutting ceremony. This program helps women and children escape domestic violence and build independent lives. It's his legacy in action. Lisa had returned to Portland but visited monthly, always amazed by her nephew's development. He has David's curiosity, she observed during one visit, watching 14-month-old David Jr. methodically empty a toy box to examine each item. And your determination. That's going to be a powerful combination. Margaret's name rarely came up anymore, except in the context of the restraining orders that would remain in effect even after her eventual release from prison. The loan sharks she'd borrowed from had been arrested in an unrelated investigation, eliminating that threat permanently. Her debts had been settled through the sale of assets she'd never actually owned, leaving her with nothing but the consequences of her choices. I sometimes wonder if David Jr. will ask about her when he's older, I confided to Lisa during one of her visits. He probably will. Children are curious about their families. Lisa watched David Jr. stack blocks with intense concentration. But you'll tell him the truth, that his grandmother was sick in ways that made her dangerous, and that his father's last act was protecting him from that sickness. The first anniversary of David's death was difficult, but it was also a celebration. David Jr. took his first steps that week, toddling across the living room toward a photo of his father, with the same determined expression David used to get when tackling challenging construction projects. "Dada," David Jr. said clearly, pointing at the photo. It was one of his first words, and hearing it broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. Mrs. Henderson, now like a surrogate grandmother to David Jr., visited regularly with stories about his father. David used to sit right here in this kitchen, she'd tell him, planning improvements for all his properties. He'd always ask what would make the tenants' lives better. Marcus and his wife had graduated from nursing school and moved into their own home, but they returned for David Jr.'s first birthday party, bringing their own toddler to play with their former landlord's son. David changed our lives, Marcus's wife told the assembled guests. He saw potential in a struggling young family and gave us the stability we needed to build something better. Now we own our own home and I'm working as a pediatric nurse. None of that would have happened without his help. Emma had remarried a kind man who understood her complicated history with the Mitchell family. She remained close to Jake and maintained a relationship with David Jr., bringing him gifts and telling him sanitized stories about his Uncle Jake and the father he'd never known. As I tucked David Jr. into his crib that night, surrounded by photos of his father and gifts from people whose lives David had touched, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. 18 months ago, I'd been a grieving widow facing harassment from my in-laws and pressure to terminate my pregnancy. Margaret had seen my baby as an obstacle to her financial recovery, a complication that threatened her desperate plans to escape crushing debt. But David Jr. hadn't been an obstacle, he'd been a catalyst. His existence had forced Margaret to reveal her true nature, expose decades of manipulation and abuse, and ultimately protected future generations from her toxicity. His birth had united David's real family, the people who chose love over loyalty, truth over tradition, protection over exploitation. The updated family tree I'd created hung on the nursery wall, showing David Jr. as the heir not just to financial assets, but to a legacy of kindness and courage. His lineage included Jake's determination to break family patterns, Lisa's fierce protection, Emma's moral courage, and the dozens of tenants and friends whose lives David had improved. Margaret's name appeared nowhere on that family tree. Not because I wanted to erase history, but because she had erased herself through her choices. Family, I'd learned, wasn't about blood. It was about who showed up, who protected you, who chose to love you even when it was difficult. 3 months later, Carmen called with news I'd been expecting. Margaret's been denied parole. The board cited her lack of genuine remorse and continued threats against family members. What kind of threats? Letters to other inmates about unfinished business and making people pay when she gets out. She's also been disciplined several times for trying to contact you through intermediaries. I wasn't surprised. Some people change when faced with consequences. Others just become more bitter and calculating. Margaret belonged to the second category. The good news, Carmen continued, is that her behavior in prison strengthens the case for keeping the restraining orders permanent. She's demonstrated that she remains a threat to you and David Jr. That evening, I sat in David's chair, holding our son as he dozed against my chest, and thought about the lessons I would teach him as he grew up. I would tell him that his father was a man who worked with his hands but dreamed with his heart, who accumulated wealth not for luxury, but for the power to help others. I would teach him that family isn't about tolerating abuse out of obligation, but about surrounding yourself with people who choose to love and protect you. Most importantly, I would make sure he understood that he was wanted, planned for, and fought for before he was even born. That his existence wasn't a burden or complication, but a gift that brought out the best in good people and exposed the worst in toxic ones. Your daddy would be so proud of you, I whispered as David Jr. settled deeper into sleep. You're exactly the person he hoped you'd become: strong, curious, surrounded by love, and free to choose your own path. Outside, autumn was giving way to winter, but inside our home, everything felt warm and bright and full of possibility. David Jr. would grow up knowing his father's story, but he wouldn't be imprisoned by his family's dysfunction. He would know that love had triumphed over manipulation, that courage had defeated coercion, That truth had proven stronger than toxic loyalty. That was David's real inheritance to his son, not money or property, but freedom. The freedom to love, without manipulation, to trust without fear, to build relationships based on choice rather than obligation. And in protecting that freedom, I had found my own strength, my own family, my own way forward. David was gone, but his love lived on in every choice I made to protect our son, every boundary I set to preserve our peace, every relationship I built based on truth rather than convenience. The story that had begun with Margaret's cruel suggestion at David's funeral that abortion would be mercy for everyone had ended with the truth. David Jr.'s life had been mercy for everyone who deserved it, and justice for those who didn't. Some legacies are built on tradition and blood, others are built on choice and love. David Jr. would inherit the second kind, and that made all the difference.